The massacre that took place in the small English village of Denham back in 1870 is still remembered as one of Buckinghamshire's grisliest crimes. A total of 7 people lost their lives. All were members of the same family. The crime scene resembled a slaughterhouse, leaving those who came upon it in disbelief and thinking who could have committed such a horrible crime, and indeed, why. Denham. It's quiet. It's quaint. And dare I say, just a little bit sleepy. This is the quintessential English village. The name itself is derived from the Old English for homestead in a valley. And in 1870, this was home to one 35-year-old Emanuel Marshall. He lived here with his wife, Charlotte, their 4 children, and his elderly mother. Their house was a 2-story cottage located on Cheapside Lane. Emanuel was a successful blacksmith, and the cottage also had an offshoot which housed a forge. The family had lived in the house for a long time, more than 4 decades, and there was no reason why they would not continue to do so. They were well liked in the village, and over the years they had been able to get themselves to the point where they lived quite comfortably. Emanuel and Charlotte had married in 1860, and by 1870 they had 4 children together. Mary, aged 8, Thurza, aged 6, Gertrude, aged 4, and Frances, aged 19 months. Emanuel's father, William, had died in 1857, leaving his mother Mary a widow at the age of 64. After his death, she too moved into her son's cottage. 1870 was the middle of the Victorian era, and despite the many advances for the time, it was still the age of the horse. Now that meant that blacksmiths were still considered as highly valuable members of the community. That and the constant improvement in agricultural equipment meant that Emanuel was always kept busy, and to that end he occasionally had to hire extra staff. And that is a detail that we will revisit. In addition, as a blacksmith, he would have made more money than many other workers. For example, back then, a soldier earned 12 shillings a week, farm labourers 14 shillings, while blacksmiths would earn 25 shillings. As far as we know, Emanuel was a hard-working man who spent a lot of time in the forge attached to the family home. There is not much information available about Charlotte, but the Bucks Advertiser described her as follows. Said by her neighbours to be an excellent housewife, as well as the most respectable woman in all her habits and conduct. A very superior woman. Some intelligent persons described her children as models of neatness and the best behaved in the parish. Emanuel's mother was also said to be a great person. Mary Marshall, the mother, aged 77, was described as a very worthy and respectable woman, to whom her son was exceedingly kind. Then there was Emanuel's sister, Mary Ann, who also was a resident with the family at the time. Early 1870 was a happy time for her. She was engaged and her big day was finally coming on Tuesday, May the 24th in Denham Parish Church. Afterwards, Mary Ann would be moving away to Hertfordshire with her new husband. But for now, while Mary was still staying at the Marshall family home for the wedding, it had been decided that the youngest child, little Frances, would live with relatives to make more room in the cottage. The family was reportedly seen on Saturday, May 21st by the village policeman and their neighbour, Elizabeth Simpson. They were also seen together at Uxbridge Market, perhaps buying food or other materials for the upcoming event. The following day was Sunday, and Emanuel's usual routine was to wake up early, around 3 or 4 a.m, and work while the rest of his family still slept. Later, they would have all gone together to church, especially as the final reading of Mary Ann's banns were due to take place. However, that Sunday the Marshall family were nowhere to be seen. Monday, May the 23rd, started like any other Monday in Denham. However, there was one thing that was not quite right. An eerie silence surrounded the normally active Marshall residence. As Lizzie Bampton, the 11-year-old daughter of the innkeeper at the Swan pub, said, "I went on Monday evening to Mrs. Marshall's house to take a dress to Mrs. Marshall to make. It was after tea. There was no answer to my knocking. Mrs. Marshall's sister came when I was there. I then left." Charlotte's sister, also named Mary Ann, reported what she had seen. "I saw Charlotte on Friday night. I promised to take tea with her on Monday. I got no answer. Neighbours had not seen anyone. The doors were locked. I saw two men coming along. I asked one of them to get a ladder, and he looked in the bedroom window, and he saw bedclothes in a heap. He then looked in the back windows on the ground floor. I heard him shout, 'For God's sake, come here.' Soon after, the door was broken down, and the gruesome reason why nobody had seen the family since Saturday was revealed." The police were called, and PC Charles Trevenant arrived at the scene around 7 p.m. While he had seen a lot as a police officer, nothing could have prepared him for what he was about to find inside the cottage. It was like a battlefield. Blood filled the scene. Charlotte's and Mary Ann's bodies were lying immediately inside the door. The bodies of the three children were found in the wash house, lying together. PC Trevenant also discovered a bloodied sledgehammer and axe. Each of the victims had their nightclothes on, except Charlotte, who had a dress partially over her nightdress. They had extensive injuries on their bodies and hands, possibly defensive wounds. There were pools of blood everywhere. As PC Trevenant continued through the property, he went into the forge and discovered Emanuel lying on his face with his arms stretched out. It appeared like he had been dragged. His body was covered with a sack, an apron, and an old coat. A few yards from the body, PC Trevenant found another pool of blood and a poker broken in two. It was thought that this was the weapon used to create the large hole in Emanuel's forehead. He had been beaten unrecognisable. Before that, it appeared that Emanuel had struggled with his assailant, resulting in terrible cuts on his hands. In addition, Emanuel's boots and other items were missing, believed to be stolen by the killer. But who could have felt so much anger towards the Marshall family, who appeared to be very well liked, that they would have butchered every single person present inside the cottage, even the children? The horrific slaying of the Marshall family shocked not only the village of just over 1,000 people, but the whole country. Needless to say, a story like this quickly spread, and the police had huge pressure to catch whoever did this, and fast. Back then, investigation methods were not as sophisticated as today. Buckinghamshire Constabulary did not even possess any detectives at the time, and so the main responsibility of the Marshall family case was given to Superintendent Thomas Dunham, who had served in the police force for close to 20 years at this point. An early theory was that Emanuel Marshall had first killed his family and then himself, but this was very quickly ruled out based on the evidence. Another theory was that the Marshall family were killed because of money that they had in the house. However, many found it hard to believe that 7 people would be bludgeoned to death in such a brutal way just because of a robbery. We do know that Emanuel had woken up early that Sunday morning to work. He had his working clothes on, and he was found inside the forge. The rest of the family had still been most likely sleeping when the murderer approached the house in the darkness. As there were no signs of a struggle inside the forge, it seems that the killer was able to completely surprise Emanuel, or that he was known to him. Afterwards, Charlotte had either woken to the noise or had been awake already, as she had her dress on. The assailant had then entered the house with a sledgehammer and axe to kill the rest of the family, perhaps to get rid of any possible witnesses. Then, It appears he had changed his clothes, as blood-stained items that didn't belong to Emanuel were found at the scene. While the police did not find any evidence pointing them to a potential suspect straight away, it did not take long for Superintendent Denham to get on the trail of the killer. A bricklayer called Charles Coombs came forward to say that a man sharing a room with him in an Uxbridge lodging house, calling himself Jack, was seen to be wearing clothes that clearly were not his, and that he had asked Charles to accompany him to pawn a pocket watch. When Charles then heard about the Marshall family massacre, he wondered if anything had been taken from the home. As Charles then mentioned Jack, the clothes and the pocket watch, he was advised to contact the superintendent. This Jack was actually John Jones, also known as John Owens, who at one point in his past had the nickname Jack the Cat Killer, a moniker he garnered due to his tendency to shoot the creatures. Not a good sign at all. John had used a stolen pistol and was sentenced to 6 weeks in Worcester jail for that crime. Afterwards, his list of offences only grew longer and included both theft offences and violent crimes. Whenever John decided to do honest work, he worked as a blacksmith, and that was his connection to Emanuel Marshall. You will recall earlier when I said Emanuel occasionally took on extra labour. One such was a Mr. John Jones. But it turns out his skill set wasn't quite as declared, and he made such an awful job of repairing a carriage wheel that in the end, Emanuel refused to pay him. The police had found their motive. Soon enough, Superintendent Denham learned from Charles that John had travelled to the Berkshire town of Reading. Having no time to lose, Denham caught the train to Reading as soon as he could, with Charles in tow, as he was the only person who knew what the suspect looked like. They arrived here at the building behind me, which at the time was Reading train station and ticket office. 5 p.m. Tuesday, the 24th of May. It didn't take them long to find John Jones. He was in the Oxford Arms public house on Silver Street. On entering, Charles identified him quickly, shouting, "That's the man." Denham leapt towards him as John tried to draw a pistol he had stolen from the Marshall's cottage. He was subdued before he could fire it. As he was confronted, he said angrily, "I have not murdered man, woman, nor child, but I know who did. I stood by, but never murdered anyone myself." But at this point, nobody had even told John the reason for his arrest. And he was literally standing there still wearing Emanuel's clothes and boots and having pawn tickets for more missing property in his pockets. Superintendent Denham knew they had the right man, and John was taken back to Slough, where he was almost lynched by an angry crowd at the station. It was also revealed that John was only released from prison a few days before the massacre and had been heard speaking of a man in Denham who owed him money, stating if he didn't get it off him, he'd kill him. His trial began on Friday, July 22nd, 1870, and was set to be the trial of the year, if not the decade. Somebody killing 7 people at the same time was unheard of. The Crown had a strong case against John, witnesses and a large number of exhibits to persuade the jury of the defendant's guilt. It turned out that a police officer had also seen John wearing Emanuel's clothing on the night of the murders. While in today's murder cases a jury might deliberate for some time, often for a number of days, in Victorian times things were a little different, and it took just 2 minutes for the jury to come back with a verdict. He was found guilty and sentenced to death by hanging. After the judge had passed sentence, the defendants turned to him and replied, "Thank ye, sir." He later said that his only regret was not shooting the policeman who captured him. Jones was executed on Monday, August 8, 1870 at 8 a.m. in Aylesbury Jail. It seems that his only motive to slaughter the Marshall family was simply the idea that Emanuel owed him money. The only survivor was little Francis Marshall, who had been fortunate enough to stay with relatives at the time of the murders. However, he only lived until the age of 18. His body was laid to rest here, along with his family that he had lost on that fateful day, at St Mary's Church. The church where they would have been attending had John Jones not committed his heinous act. The church where his sister was due to be married. The stone is a little worn, and there's a plaque has been placed at the front so that everybody can clearly read the message. This is a memorial to all those who lost their lives in the Denham Massacre. Thank you for watching. It really is appreciated. Right then, take care, and I'll see you next time with another story to make you say, well, I never.